Hello and thank you for joining us. My name is Ben Sheen. I'm a managing editor here at Stratfor, and with me today is military analyst Tack, and he'll be talking to me about the ongoing situation in Somalia. So Sim, can you give us a bit of an overview about what's actually happening on the ground in Somalia at the moment? Because we've seen some major offensives recommence against Shabaab militants in the region.
Basically, where we're coming from is a situation where the AMISOM peacekeeping operation, supported by the Somali national troops, had been slowly expanding their reach into the countryside, where Al-Shabaab still operates quite freely. And the problem is that that expansion of control had also kind of stretched out the resources that this peacekeeping force had to secure those areas. As a consequence, they have been very recently unable to secure some of the bases where they took up positions and suffered significant casualties in combat with Al-Shabaab. That caused them to vacate some of those bases, kind of stop and think, how are we going to address this issue at this point? And then the major response to this situation was the Operation Juba Corridor, which is the operation that we saw unfurl over the last few days, where Ethiopia sent about 3,000 troops across the border as a part of the AMISOM peacekeeping operation and started moving towards the town of Bardere, which was one of the main remaining towns under Al-Shabaab control. And then as a consequence of that operation, we also saw Kenyan AMISOM forces and Jubaland, which is a local administration within Somalia, mount forces to move onto Bardere from a separate direction, which eventually led to those Kenyan and Jubaland forces taking control of Bardere yesterday.
Gosh, so there's quite a bit going on. And to give a bit of context, initially in Somalia, we were seeing gains made against Al-Shabaab 2011, 2012. But then, like you said, there was this sort of overextension, and Al-Shabaab continued to be ruthless, using guerrilla-style tactics, and pretty effective. And then, like you say, Amazon, which is composed of numerous African nations, are now really uniting to try and score this decisive victory against Al-Shabaab, seen by the Operation Juba Corridor. I understand there's some friction between some of the nations involved in the collective and also against the smaller collectives like Jubaland itself. Can you talk about that?
Yes, definitely. And this is one of the more interesting elements of this particular operation, actually. So within Somalia, due to the power vacuum that has existed because of the civil war that's gone on for quite a long time, you've basically got several local administrations that are not necessarily claiming independence, but that have, at times only cooperated with Mogadishu in very limited ways. And Jubaland is one of the main ones here because it has received substantial support from Kenya.
Does Mogadishu even recognize Jubaland?
So Mogadishu does recognize a lot of these local administrations, including Jubaland. The thing is that Mogadishu recognizes them as part of the federal system, where the federal government in Mogadishu sits on top of these regions. The problem is that Jubaland specifically, as well as some of these other regions, have come out and said at certain times, we do not recognize the rule of Mogadishu right now because they are incapable of enforcing law, of actually running the country under its current condition.
So that leads them to reach out to other patrons like Kenya.
Exactly. And for Kenya, this makes a lot of sense because they've been facing significant effects from spillover and trying to set up a secure area by supporting a regime that they feel might be more effective than Mogadishu in controlling the border areas just right next to Kenya, which is where the Juba area is located. That becomes a much more effective strategy for them than to try and indirectly support Mogadishu, who would then support activities in other parts of the country. And this is also one of the reasons why we saw the Kenyans and the Jubaland forces actually move on Bardere when the Ethiopians did, because first of all, they want to be first to arrive in Bardere so that they can claim that as part of their administration rather than it becoming part of a directly administrated area by Mogadishu. And on top of that, the Ethiopian offensive also caused Al-Shabaab fighters in the area to scatter out and try to escape from the offensive, pushing them into the sector that is actually controlled by Kenya and Jubaland.
Now, as well as the Kenyans and the Ethiopians, there's an additional part to this as well, isn't there, which is the contribution from Uganda. And one of the issues in the past, operating in the vast reaches of Somalia itself, is is simply the distances involved and the highly contested roads. Whereas actually, if you can have air operations, then you can succeed a little bit better, can't you?
That's correct. Uganda was not particularly involved in this current offensive, but Uganda is one of the main countries in AMISOM, and they mostly operate around the Mogadishu area. Mogadishu still is kind of the central area from where these peacekeeping operations have expanded. So when we're talking about the problems to secure lines of communication between the main bases in Mogadishu and certain outposts that Al-Shabaab has recently attacked, the Ugandan contribution in terms of attack helicopters and transport helicopters that they're talking about right now becomes a very useful tool in trying to actually maintain that expansion.
Absolutely. Well, I know this is something you're tracking very closely in military teams, so we look forward to more analysis in the future. Thanks so much for joining me today, Sim. And for more on the situation in Somalia and other parts of Africa, please continue to read stratfor.com.